we were born with inalienable rights, and one of them is to choose how we do commerce, how we interact with other people, we're a means of exchange. All these things are our natural born rights. I mean, you kind of give them away when you sign into the government and you vote and you do this, and you become a person and you have to act personally and appear in person. That separation that people don't really grasp.
Hello, I am Codyellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I talk with Gareth Farry, a creative producer and currently the Partnerships and Special Projects Manager at Amnesty International, Aotearoa, New Zealand. We touch on questions of law, sovereignty, and the relationship with the state, as well as what we can learn from Māori culture as it relates to self-sovereign communities. Finally, we discuss alternative understandings of identity and money through a Bitcoin and freedom technology lens. If you would like to support my work and growing this show, please consider tipping some Bitcoin to the show's wallet. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open. hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. How have you been, Gareth?
I've been good, thanks. Yep, busy. Just busy with kids and doing work and etc. and keeping life ticking along.
Yeah. You must be coming into spring though now, right?
It's just started to get warmer actually. I live out west in the bush, and it's lovely. It's lovely out here. So winter's always a bit full on because it's quite wet. Technically a rainforest.
Yeah, West Auckland.
West Auckland, yeah.
Yeah. I used to spend a little bit of time out in Titirangi. In that area, which is really nice, like just primeval kind of forests and just beautiful.
It's beautiful, man.
Oh man,
it's stunning. We have like owls at night time and hordes of frogs and just all sorts of amazing stuff happens out here. It's really cool.
Yeah, and you still got you can find quite a lot of kauri up that way as well. The trees and just
big kauri on my forest, big ones.
Yeah.
On my property, big ones, yeah.
Yeah. But Gareth, I thought we could start maybe just with a little bit about your story. Like, where are you from originally? What's your background?
I was born and raised in Dunedin. I am half Lebanese, half Scottish Kiwi. So I like to joke that I've got background with a bad temper on both sides, or fiery on both sides. As I get older, that's less true. But brought up in Dunedin. Did my schooling there. I went to Otago University, got a cultural anthropology degree and a law degree, and then moved up to Auckland, did my profs. I got admitted to the bar and the legal profession, although I've never really actually practiced. I mean, my family does have a law firm, but I've never technically practiced. So I did that, and I ended up actually, when I was finishing my university days in Dunedin, I managed a bar called Bath Street, which was kind of the first sort of clubby kind of bar in Dunedin. And so when I came to Auckland, I did the same thing with a place called Lounge. And that evolved also into a talent agency, or evolved out of a talent agency called Sama Productions, which I worked with 5 other people on. And it was sort of a multi-ethnic, intercultural talent agency. It was, quite leading edge at the time in Auckland. This is more than 20 years ago. And then out of that, because of the music side and the music artists were my focus, I did a record label called Sugarlicks and toured artists around Europe and released vinyl and did all sorts of different things like that, which was an amazing time. And then digital music came along with streaming and LimeWire, etc. And so I've kind of just destroyed my business model. So I gave that up. And kind of at the time, I mean, when I was doing arts and music, I was also really interested in the social aspect of it, like art for a purpose and social justice work and activism and decolonization work and this sort of things, and art and music. And so I took that on, that sort of approach on, and went and worked for the British Arts Council and ran the arts and partnerships program for them for 7 years in New Zealand. And I did a lot of that sort of work with the intersection of social impact and, freedom of expression, art consciousness, these sorts of things. Creative culture, creative economy, social enterprise ideas, these sorts of things. And so I did that for 7 years, and then took their program called Active Citizens, which is, and worked with LifeWise in Auckland, who had a program called, probably still running, called Housing First. And they take people who are rough sleepers and house them and sort of do wraparound services as much as possible. And we kind of came in with a program for after that to look at the people who are ready for social enterprise training and try to give them skills and, micro engagement and just sort of give them a bit of a helping hand as far as developing their own skills into social enterprise. So yeah, been working in that area, and I'm currently working with Amnesty International, working on a bit of partnership work, but also kind of in the blockchain DAO space, trying to create a DAO. I think I've mentioned to you about for a supporter coordination
Yeah.
for the 10 million member Amnesty movement worldwide.
We've had some conversations about that. I had some ideas for you about that, about where you can take that. But certainly, no, I mean, we caught up on that. It was really interesting. And just the work you're doing with Amnesty International is quite exciting. Certainly a big opportunity there. And so you had this interesting connection between law, anthropology, and then a music career. And then you're now working in this kind of human rights, Amnesty International space. I'm curious, did you ever come across a guy, coming back to the music, in Auckland, a guy, Murray Kamak? Have you come across him at all?
Yeah, I know Murray well.
Yeah.
He's a legend. He's a legend.
Yeah, I used to hang out a little bit with him. I haven't seen him in a few years, but I think he photographed when Bob Marley came over to New Zealand back in the day. He shot him.
He's got those photos, yep.
Yeah, and he's done some
He
really
was original, I think I'm getting them right. Was it Rip It Up?
Yeah,
the magazine?
Yeah, the music magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
he's a legend. Yeah.
Yeah, he's cool. We've had some good chats and coffees, and when I was visiting Auckland when I was still back.
Yeah, he's a lovely personable guy. He's kind of old school music industry, really straight up. Loves the music. Just into giving away, any knowledge that he has in the industry. He's cool. He's a rock.
Yeah, I should. That reminds me, I should probably reach out to him again. But
yeah, you should.
Just kind of going down this path a little bit though. We caught up, I guess, a couple of months ago now about Bitcoin, Nostr, and some of the stuff I'm doing, some of the stuff you're doing. And I'd like to pull on what pulled you down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. What sort of was the beginning of your exploration of what Bitcoin could mean for people?
It was a couple of things. First of all, I got into Web3 through a couple of musicians, Mark DeFive and Morning Stepper Arama got me into it. And they kind of orange-pilled me, I guess you could say, because I really understood that there was something called digital scarcity and provable ownership. And for me, as someone who was managing a portfolio of music, an intangible asset, basically, online for a period of time, that was a real missing link for us, was the fact that we were getting, there was piracy happening and it was just impossible to figure out. I mean, my stuff was loaded onto streaming platforms and I own the master rights. No one ever sent me an email and told me about it. I've got no idea where the royalties would go. They're so minimal that I'm not really worried about it, so that really, when I found out about Web3 and what it could do and blockchain could do, then that really schooled me up. And then from the other side, I've always been interested in pluriversive ideas, like the whole many worlds interpretation of what's going on, rather than the universal concept that we're put on, which is the state-sponsored kind of Western European concept that runs the world through financial systems. And I always thought there must be better ways to do this. How can we express ourselves and be free? And when I was going through that analysis through my head and using law over the years, from leaving university 20 odd years ago and having to kind of reverse engineer a lot of the stuff that I was taught, it always came up that barrier, which was money. Why do people have to do what they have to do? Why do they have to work? Why do they carry on having to do what they're doing and being in these unequal and inequitable relationships with states or organizations, etc.? And it's really because next week people need to pay the bills, And it was just really as simple as that. And what is our relationship with banking and money? Who are we? What status do we hold? What is taxation? Is it based on consent? How come there's a law of contract that seems to be broken by the stronger party all the time, being the state? They don't give us full disclosure. They don't follow the laws of contract. Is it a contract? Is it not? All these questions are going through my head. So when I found out about Bitcoin and the ability to have peer-to-peer immutable sound money, I just thought that's the missing link. That's really the missing link. It's kind of too good to be true. I wish I had found out about it 10 years earlier than I did. I mean, I'm sort of 2019, 2020 kind of thing. But it really just struck me as revolutionary freedom technology, really. And I think now with that kind of same idea coming on to social media platforms and Web3 social, whatever you want to call it, through something that is actually truly decentralized, like Nostr, incorruptible, can't be surveilled, you can't stop what people want to say on there, and it's distributed, so it's held in relays, and it's if a few nodes go down, it's not going to affect the system, and it's actually truly decentralized. So again, another part of the missing link. We need to be able to communicate with each other. We need to be able to exchange and do that freely and openly and honestly. And I think that for me is amazing progression.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of there's some really cool connections with, you sort of talk about this dominant, I guess, ideology of Western state, nation state kind of thinking, but the peer-to-peer thing, certainly in the New Zealand context, if you look at the Maori culture, history of, word of mouth and kind of oral communication, oral storytelling, there's certainly some connections there,
Totally.
and I know there's a project, the Aho, have you come across that?
Yeah, I have come across them. I've spoken to Ben. He's been traveling quite a lot, but yeah, amazing project. And ho.io, for anyone interested, it's sort of a tribal ownership and sovereignty identity project, and it's very interesting. I think it's sort of just received another round of funding from Project Catalyst Online, I think. But it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were using, I believe, the Secure Scuttlebutt protocol, which is similar, it's kind of a precursor to Nostr, slightly different architecture. But
is that Rebel's work and the Wellington crew's work?
Yeah, there's Rebel and Mikey and a few of those guys down there. So it's kind of homegrown as well, which is really cool. And I'm excited to see what it could mean because it sort of also aligns with the idea of like running your own node, because you could have these units in the marae, and it's kind of cool, right? You can be self-sovereign.
That's an amazing idea, and also it also integrates the whole idea of citizenship and identity and what is it? Because I went through high school, 13 years or whatever, law school, admitted to the bar 5.5 years, went through the whole legal system, and nobody ever mentioned to me, hey, whakaputanga, the 1835 Declaration of Independence, which actually in international law is still the sovereign agreement for this nation. So when King George wanted to entreat with a nation, you need a body capable of entreaty, so it needs to be on the same status as a state. So the Declaration of Independence created a sovereign body on this land, on this whenua, and that was the body that was then able to entreat. But actually in international law, it's still the sovereign body on the land. So I find that all that Aho stuff and the Matiki Mai, the constitutional reformation stuff, it's fascinating because it's really uncovering aspects of the law that have been hidden for a long time.
Yeah, and along those lines, I saw Paul Moon, who's a New Zealand historian. He's just come out with a book on the various documents of kind of colonial New Zealand, and obviously everyone would be familiar with the Treaty of Waitangi, but there's actually quite a few historical documents that came out in that period, and they've got like full color pictures of them and scans, and it's like beautiful handwriting, and I'm actually quite keen to check it out because that, as you say, there's a number of things, a number of kind of because New Zealand was such a late project in terms of colonization, we have quite a lot of records of it, and as you sort of understand this sovereignty thing, seeing it happen with these historical documents, sort of the blow by blow, it's really interesting because it helps you deconstruct, maybe in a sense, the workings of the nation state. Like, how did it legitimize? And ultimately, it comes back to force, I think, but there is also the contractual kind of language-based side, and it's just super fascinating to like kind of unpick that historical moment.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's there's a really good book, Financial Colonization of New Zealand, that BWB Books has put out last year, and that just indicates that a lot of the initial stuff, although there was a treaty between the Crown and Māori here, a lot of the stuff that was happening commercially was run by private companies, and the ownership and the speculative land sales, etc., all done by private companies. So there's also that public-private crossover, and a lot of what was put onto the Indigenous people of this country was through force, and a lot of it put on them and the rest of us, tauiwi, was actually through tacit consent, without us really understanding what that means, silent consent, or just agreeing, even though the terms don't fulfill contract law or don't give you full disclosure, or maybe, in some ways even fraudulent, if you consent to it, it kind of makes it a zero sum. So you're just going along with something that you're not really sure what it's all about,
Yeah. Well, I think, Gareth, a really interesting lens to look at this through, because I mean, I'm in an interesting place where I talk to a lot of different people, and I had Don Brash on just the other week, and he's quite controversial with some of his opinions about the role of the treaty and equality in New Zealand, and I think that's one pole that you can look at. And then another way you can look at this is, I mean, we're kind of all in this together at this point. We're all New Zealanders, and what is the next phase we're moving into? Because there is this historical project, and there's certainly some challenges there, and it cuts quite deep for a lot of people. But moving into the new world, the sovereign individual world, you could perhaps say, where maybe the nation state actually is becoming irrelevant, and we're seeing kind of a replay of a new system that is kind of colonizing the old system, and I know that's a problematic word, but with something like Bitcoin, where the nation state cannot tax it, they cannot trace it, they cannot control it. What does that mean? Is that similar to something like the old world and the new world colliding together? How can we integrate that with the New Zealandness and kind of the mana that we already have, without kind of making it into a disruptive thing? It's kind of like, how can we all move forward and kind of approach that in a holistic way? So it's quite a big challenge.
That's a hard question. That's a hard question, and I don't know. I think it's probably going to be a mix between the two. There is going to be definitely some conflict, and there's going to be people that are moving ahead, regardless, and creating new systems regardless, and just attracting users and doing what they do. I think for me, it's really an understanding of where we are today and what has led us here, and an unraveling of some of those inequitable situations and agreements that have led us here, and really just also an understanding, a mature understanding, that as a nation we need to look at the knowledge of our Indigenous people about the land and seasons and these broader ideas that maramataka or whatever there may be, even ideas about giving and gifting and social economies around koha and mana, whatever they might be, and understand that a full of appreciation and integration of those ideas is going to enhance our nation, and it's going to really stick us out. Because when you go overseas, people, when they think about New Zealand, they know obviously Lord of the Rings, etc. They know the All Blacks, but they really want to know about Māori culture. I mean, the amount of times I've been traveling in somewhere like the Middle East and people have said, "Oh, you're from New Zealand, can you do a haka?" And I have to explain, well, it's not actually my culture, and you don't want to see me doing a haka, but that they're interested because it's our really unique, the Māori Pacific angle. It's actually, the intercultural angle, Māori Pacific, Pākehā, everyone else is here, where we are in the world, what we represent is really to bring that into a full equation. I think is where we really all need to head and towards equity, and that it's not going to be easy.
Well, on that note, something that stands out to me that I think we can all be quite proud of, though, is that there is a very strong sense of self-sovereignty in New Zealand and with all parties involved, and I think, you can talk about rangatiratanga as self-sovereignty perhaps, and if you take that further and you kind of remove this sort of creeping statism, which I think my Don Brash would sort of probably say the same, but what is the state doing, choosing these things and kind of the state cannot fix the things that have been done that it did. It's kind of like the abuser in this case, right? On a social level, though, can we move forward and run with the idea of like the Aho project or Bitcoin or Nostr, and like giving people the keys to self-sovereignty without the state being involved? And I think there's like a nuanced thing there where it's a communication issue. How do we help people understand that? But I think a lot of the challenges come down to the redistributive kind of taxation, Waitangi Tribunal stuff, which gets people that gets their back up. It's like, well, what is the state doing, kind of choosing these things and kind of moving these things around? But I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer, man, but it's sort of, I wonder if this is a new way forward where everyone actually has the opportunity to opt in. There's no gatekeepers anymore.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I totally think it is. And it's also just around a different conception of value. I mean, we kind of have a deficit mindset where we have to go into debt to pay for this and that. But we all, in the back of our minds, we know that central banks print currency. And now
they've said it out loud now.
Yeah, they print. Yeah, exactly. It's almost getting to the point it's becoming farcical. They print the currency out of thin air, and maybe not our first tier bank here, but the BIS and IMF, etc. overseas, the main gatekeepers do that, and they give us our little pocket money budgets that we call a budget, But if they can do it, and they're privately owned, we know that now. So if they can do it, then why can't we do it? And why can't we create different forms of value that really enhance community ownership and resilience and cultural preservation and these things? We can actually do that now. So I think it definitely is a bit of an escape route, and I feel like it's the logic of inertia. It's just going to have to go there. The more and more people wake up and understand this is we have the ability to do this, then the more it'll happen. But also there's another thing that needs to happen, and you and I both know it's like a personal internal thing. You need to decide to stand in your power, and who am I, and what is my relationship with everybody else, and that's kind of some of the work that I do in identity and just interrogating what is my status and who am I? Am I encumbered? How come the state gets to tell me what to do? When did I agree to do that? On what basis did I agree to do that? And then you start to interrogate ideas about what is a person and what is a man and a woman. What are the jurisdictions of law? How do they rank? What jurisdiction am I operating in? Can I operate in a higher jurisdiction, and then in that way I can be the executor over the legal person rather than the trustee of that birth certificate legal first and trust, which means I just end up having to pay for everything in my name rather than being the creditor and leveraging everything in my name. So these options in the law are available to people, but it takes a commitment to personal growth, a commitment to knowledge, and a little bit of bravery, I think. But these are the times we're in, really. I think it's about stepping forward and say, well, I know it's wrong. These things are wrong. So what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of really interesting overlap here because, I mean, also the concept of the marae, which maybe people overseas aren't familiar with, but sort of, collection of, I guess, structures and physical space, but it's a community, a Maori community space, right? And for me, that is basically a Bitcoin citadel. You've got, the different structures. Historically, you've got defensive pars as well, but more modern marae, it's a meeting place, and it's kind of got spiritual locations and kind of communal locations, utility locations. It's basically self-sovereign community within the nation state kind of. Kind of peppered throughout, right? And this informal network where you can go from marae to marae and walk from one to the other. There's this kind of things that I think apply very closely to the way maybe Bitcoiners, self-sovereign individuals conceive the way the world could be under Bitcoin standard.
Yeah, I agree. It's like future ancient stuff, being future ancient. I mean, I know, during the lockdown, I knew of some elder Māori that I worked with in the kind of K Road area, and they could travel up and down the country without restriction using hapu jurisdiction, and they were allowed to do it. They understood it. They understood jurisdiction on the land. They were using 1835 a whakaputanga jurisdiction, and they were allowed free to travel because the police and the legal system had no jurisdiction over them. So that marae is its own jurisdiction, its own way of being. And I agree. I think that a lot of that relationality and that sort of work are some of the aspects that really inspire Bitcoiners and people in the freedom tech movement. Is just getting back to the old idea of social currencies, where things kind of are like a record of events, but also holding the social bonds and constructing and maintaining and amplifying the social bonds that we have. So I think that stuff is I see a convergence as the Bitcoin and freedom tech thinking pushes forward. You can see it actually looping back around to indigenous thinking, indigenous thinking for European people to pre-colonization, pre-imperialist days, back to Druidic ideas or whatever. It's the same kind of stuff, and it's almost like a loop, closing the circle when you really interrogate what Bitcoin and all this stuff is about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just something like the Maori Wardens, which is an interesting kind of concept, kind of not quite police, they're not armed. They don't, I don't quite fully know the legal situation there, but they are able to sort of elder Maori people are able to come into, events and kind of help with, I would say, kind of security/policing type situations. I don't know how you would describe it, Gareth, but it's very interesting because that's a clear example of a non-state kind of a system for law and order. And everyone thinks, well, if you don't have a government, what's going to happen? But I mean, that's a clear example to me of a respect-based social system that is non-state for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think we have to give humans some credit and say if all the structure and the apparatus of the matrix has fallen away, are we just going to run and buy 50-inch TVs tomorrow and just gorge ourselves to death, or are we going to be responsible humans? And I think that the latter will be the case, and that the people who don't understand how to communicate and cooperate with their neighbours won't be cooperated or communicated with, and it'll just work like that, So I think that New Zealand as a country should be totally run on a secure network like Nostr, all the voting, everything. If we have $1 billion to spend on the women's refuge or another lane of tar seal on a road, why can we not all choose that? I think that it's the technology is there, and there's bigger civic or deliberative democracy examples around the world that have been used for more than 5 million people, in Barcelona and Audrey Tang's thing in Taiwan. There's plenty of examples. So I think we should evolve to the point where communities have the say over the community spend, and it's all done through blockchain, and maybe Bitcoin is funding it, and we just get on with it,
Yeah, it's really exciting times. There are a lot of I've certainly had conversations with people who are looking at these quite closely, because we didn't really have the mechanism during the age of big state. You just sort of, again, that tacit consent and the role of violence in crushing opposition and new ideas was quite strong during the 20th century. But now, with the waning nation-state project, things are starting to leak through. And certainly if you can remove the ability of the state to coerce you through taxation, the ability of the state to repossess your property and these kinds of things, if you have it in Bitcoin, you start to become a little bit, it changes the balance of power. And this is classic sovereign individual stuff, that politics is downstream of technology. And we're seeing that start to happen now. I don't know, it seems like one of the core pillars, though, of this would be freedom of speech, to be able to talk about the ideas. So what are your thoughts on what that means?
Just putting my Amnesty hat on, we obviously work campaigns around freedom of speech and freedom of the right to assembly and protest all around the world, and it seems to have gotten worse and worse since I started working with them 2 or 3 years ago. And this is where this technology becomes so powerful, because it's the ability through, like a blockchain DAO mechanism, to have people to have their say, or through Nostr to be able to create groups and to be able to talk pseudonymously or totally anonymously without the state surveilling it at all, or to use peer-to-peer cash, using Bitcoin to get around, governments locking your bank accounts. Something like the Canada truck protest was probably a good example of that during the pandemic. So I think that there's plenty of opportunities for this technology to assist, definitely.
Yeah, and on that line as well, there's freedom of speech. We've just seen Brazil, I think, block X or Twitter. And how many hundreds of millions of people was that? And we've got obviously the US elections coming up, and this is a battleground not just for freedom of speech, but you've got AI, you've got kind of the classic propaganda techniques getting deployed, all on all sides. It's just this kind of arms race of information warfare in a sense. And it's pretty full on, I try not to get too sucked into it, but
it's fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Especially just all the deep fake stuff and everything that's coming out with AI, and it's just, you don't know what to believe. But even X is a centralized platform, right?
Yeah.
It's a commercial platform. It's a centralized platform. Nostr's not. It's like nobody's making bank off more subscribers joining, and people are writing their own protocols and apps on just because it's free and open to do it, So it's different. It's a different thing. I wouldn't mind if X went down. It serves a useful purpose, but it's able to be coerced too.
Yeah. And I think the other part of all of this is that I think we still have a conception of nation-state democracies as in everyone gets a say, everyone's on the same playing field. But I think part of the decentralization that is taking place is that you actually have different kinds of communities with different they kind of opt in, but you have different influences and different powers. So, for example, I think the Bitcoiners who are on Nostr and they hold their own money are in a much more powerful position than someone who's not doing that. And I don't know if everyone gets to do that unless they choose to, because it is opt-in. Anyone can do it, but not everyone will do it. And so I wonder whether, instead of the kind of concept of a homogenous polity of people, everyone, one person, one vote, I actually wonder whether it's like, well, if you've got Bitcoin and you're self-sovereign, you actually have kind of more inherent I guess, political power, then if you don't choose to do that, and there's no one stopping you doing it, but I think a lot of people maybe get sucked into kind of the mass politics of, I'm just going to stay the way I was. I wonder whether, you're talking about using a system for, funding of government spending, for example, but I wonder whether it is like that, or whether it's more like there's people who get in and they choose to be civically minded, and they're the ones who maybe have more say on what happens, and then there's other people who choose to opt out.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it's going to be like that anyway, I think, and we have to understand that we have the right to do that. We were born with inalienable rights, and one of them is to choose how we do commerce, how we interact with other people, we're means of exchange. All these things are our natural born rights. I mean, you kind of give them away when you sign into the government and you vote and you do this and you become a person and you have to act personally and appear in person. That separation that people don't really grasp. What is a person? What is a man? And how are they different, man or a woman? And but I think there's going to be like I said, I'm into the pluriverse. I think there's going to be all sorts of options, and people. Not everybody's going to come to this tech, and not everybody's going to start figuring out onboarding into Web3 and wallets and all that sort of stuff. And not everybody's ready for self-custody. I mean, if you got 20 grand in Bitcoin and then you are stupid with your key and you lose it, there's nobody on the planet that can get your Bitcoin back,
Yeah.
That's up to you. Not everybody's ready for that. And some people should choose, some people love to have the state to look after them, and they got a good job working for the state, and it all works well for them. So I think this is just down to individual choice. And as you know, we've been going through a period of 5 years where the awakening of people and the lift of consciousness has been accelerated. So there'll be people who want to do this and people who don't want to do it. And that's all part of freedom of choice.
Yeah. And I think that is exciting, where you've got an empowered class of people who, it's not class of people. It's like you've got an empowered group who can choose freedom, and they have the tools now to pursue it. And I think maybe previously we saw movements sort of around the 60s. There was kind of, a bit of a movement happening, and that kind of failed basically because they didn't have the tools to fight back at the state, which was at that point kind of its strongest ever. Whereas now, the states are kind of on their last legs. They're trying to grasp for straws, and they've been captured by themselves in a sense as sort of professional politicians and all of that. So very exciting times, but also it's important to also temper it with, I think, introspection, philosophy, these kinds of responsible civic inquiries. We don't want this to be, knee-jerk reactions or anything like that.
Definitely not.
And I think generally Bitcoiners are, pretty well-read people, pretty calm people. I don't think the protests and the demos on the street happen from the Bitcoiners. I think they happen from the people who, don't know what's going on. And I think we're starting to see sort of murmurs. There's different conflicts taking place around the world. There's sort of little bits and hotspots here and there, but I think the Bitcoiners are sort of looking at it and thinking, okay, well, where does all of this come from? And it's coming from the state, But
yeah, definitely. And I think that once you get into this and you realize you've got a bit of work to do, and you've got to set yourself up, and you've got to embody, you've got to stand in your power and embody it. We've been disrupting for a long time, or some of us have been protesting for a while, and we speak out against this and that, and sometimes get cancelled on social media, or get told that you're going to lose your job because you called it a pandemic or whatever it might be. And so this, because the 60s and 70s, amazing time to be alive for those who are alive there. And, we all get a lot of inspiration about the art and the music. I do, especially from that era. But they didn't have a couple of things that we've got now. They didn't have sound money, because they still had to earn an income. So you can still lose your job and everything you've got, your house, everything. Didn't have sound money that they could protect. And they didn't have sound communication, freedom of communication, decentralized, distributed, uncensorable communication. And we have both of those things now. So it's like, well, okay, so what are we going to do with those things? What are we going to do? And it's not for everybody. But I always say that once you wake up and you kind of get into this waka, you never go back,
Yeah.
We're on the winning team because our numbers are just, we never lose anybody. Once you're in here and you're convinced, it's like, okay, well, this is it. I need to incorporate this in my life in some way and build towards this being the model for my life, because it just makes complete sense, right?
Yeah, man. So, Gareth, I am keen to just drill a little bit more into Amnesty International. So, you said you've been working with them for a couple of years. If people aren't super familiar with what Amnesty is doing, I mean, how would you describe it at a high level as an organisation?
It's just an organisation that protects and promotes human rights, based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Basically, that's what it is. So we do research, advocacy, narrative change work, campaigning, these sorts of areas, really to ensure that people have their human rights upheld. So it goes right across from, in New Zealand, we're working a lot in criminal justice, so minimum standards for people incarcerated, and that may include asylum seekers as well as those convicted. Minimum standards for them, and also integration of more te tiriti principles into criminal justice, so more a whānau-centric approach, and looking at those broader concepts and those older and deeper concepts that maybe can envelop some of the more rigid linear concepts in the criminal justice system. So that's an area we work in, and we also work speaking about freedom of speech and freedom of protest for international people who are in oppressive regimes, and this is where this technology starts to become really fascinating, actually.
Yeah, and so there's Amnesty International. Obviously, it's an international organisation, but there's also, I guess, a branch based out of New Zealand.
We call them sections. So there's 70 sections across the world, and sort of 60 something countries.
Yeah, and I'm just curious as a side topic. Are you familiar with barrister Douglas Ewan? Have you come across his work at all?
No.
Oh, so no, that's okay. He recently he did a lot of work on criminal justice in New Zealand, and he was part of overturning the three strikes law and a few other things, working with people. But I just thought you might know him. But
I mean, my role in that space is to support. So we've just convened a hui with all the main stakeholders advocating in the space, and my role is to support from the background of trying to create a structure that can have more of a impact and create a central point of contact for speaking to governments. So that's kind of more my role. But I have experts in my team who've been doing criminal justice advocacy for quite a while.
Yeah. Cool. And how is Amnesty International situated alongside other organisations? Do you have partners or other groups that you work closely with?
We traditionally have been very, very independent. So independent from corporations, independent from all governments, so no government funding or partnerships, no corporate funding of partnerships, and very limited other NGO or other organizations that we can partner with. So it's been like that for a purpose, but I think that the organization is evolving, as we speak, and realizing that there's a huge amount of organizations now that try and do work in human rights areas, so upholding human rights or working for SDG goals or whatever they might be, who are looking for create positive impact. And also there's venture capitalists and for-purpose capital funds that are out there that specifically for these needs. So, the movement as a whole is looking to diversify as far as partnerships at the moment, but it's a reasonably slow road on that front.
Yeah, and with I guess coming back to New Zealand, I mean, I've certainly found I love talking to anyone who will listen about Bitcoin, and I've had many people on the show, but I certainly found a real lack of understanding of what the paradigm of Bitcoin means for Māori, for all New Zealanders. And I just wonder if this is something you've come across either personally or through your work with Amnesty. It's sort of like there's a fascination with certain aspects of, I guess you could say, broadly crypto stuff, but the core crux of money and communication, which I think are the two most important pieces, and probably money if I had to choose one in terms of Bitcoin, I just don't see people understand it. I've certainly asked a lot of people about it, and they just don't seem to grok it. What do you think is the issue there?
I think it's just a matter of time and numbers, actually. I was one of those people 10 years ago or even less, and people get their information from a variety of sources. If they're mainly getting information from mainstream sources, and there's been reports of Bitcoin being bad for climate change and being speculative and a scam, even though obviously overall it's the best asset class and ever existed, really, as far as profit. But they just read those stories, and then the onboarding's difficult, and there's a lot of there's a lot of scams. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of meme scams, a lot of stuff that gets released for rug pulls with no utility at all, and it just scares people off, and I can understand why. So I think that's the main reason. It's just a matter of the technology and the communication maturing, and big players starting to use it, and you can see it sort of happening. You can definitely see it happening, and it's just a matter of time, I feel. But I have found a lot of people, most people I talk to, they're either in it and you can have a conversation, or they have just those talking points saying, "Isn't it a scam?" or "It's bad for the environment," or whatever. And you can have those discussions with them and explain how that's not actually the case anymore. But if they're at that level, and a government or a newspaper would say to them, "It's very, very risky, very, very much a scam, and there's been this and that happening in the past," then most people are likely not to touch it.
Yeah, well, I guess to just drill on that a little bit, the issue I've encountered more than once is that, in particular when it comes to Maori sort of relations with the state, there's sort of this idea that the state or kind of state-like structures are required to mediate historical issues, and sort of how would I put this? The idea that there's actually a way out of this without involving Big Daddy state hasn't come across to a lot of people, and for me it feels a bit disingenuous that you can set up commissions and organizations, and you can go and do these speaking tours and organize things, but if you're not including Bitcoin in that platform to talk about, the whole thing is irrelevant, because it still kind of sits within the state, and I can think of a few individuals who I won't name, but it's like, why is it my responsibility to educate a bit better? But like, we're still groveling for sponsorship or funding or grants or whatever from the state to sort this thing out, but that it just doesn't feel like that will ever resolve the issue.
Yeah, I agree. It's the master-servant relationship, and that relationship only ever stays a master-servant relationship. At the end of the day, they can pull the pin and take whatever they want out of your bank accounts, or requisition your land. They can even take your children, so the state, apparently. So, I agree. I mean, but I think it's happening, and it's just maybe couched in different terms. I've had conversations with, people here saying, well, wouldn't it be interesting to see a Māori, do a Māori coin or something like that and just mint it and print it and do a token for it and just start trading with it. I think that would be fascinating. But then, someone countered and said, well, there is no quote unquote Māori. There's hapu, there's hapu jurisdictions, and tuhois never ceded sovereignty to anyone, including other Māori tribes. So there is no Māori. Maybe it's a iwi or a hapu thing. I don't really know. I'm not Māori, so I can't speak for Māori. But I think there's a fascinating space, and it's just a matter of saying, hey, we're a people. We've been wronged. We've got the jurisdiction on the land. We have the right to create our own commercial instruments. And, in the Bill of Exchange Act in New Zealand, 1908 Bill of Exchange Act, I think it's the last section. It says anything in this act, and not that I have to rely on a lower jurisdiction like the legal jurisdiction to claim this, but it just say it in there anyway. It says anything in this act where it's inconsistent with common law or the law merchant does not apply. So it supersedes the act of the Bill of Exchange Act. The Bill of Exchange Act deals with promissory notes, which is money, security instruments, bills of exchange, whatever else. Everything to do with money is dealt with in that act. And it's saying to you that common law, indigenous law, or English common law, or community law, and the law merchant are they are higher jurisdiction, and they supersede what is in the legal statute. So it's giving you clues right there, but people haven't interrogated what they are. I mean, most people would never know, for instance, if they're talking about merchant law, what is merchant law in New Zealand? People have never really heard of that term, and it's talking about merchant law being higher than statute law when it comes to bills of exchange and money. So what is merchant law? I mean, I've got a book here that is called The Ancient Treatise on Lex Mercatoria, which is merchant law. The Ancient Treatise on Lex Mercatoria, and it's from 1649. I've got the PDF, not the original copy, but it's from 1649. So we're talking about laws that were called ancient in 1649 that still have higher status than our legal system. So there's a lot of uncovering and a lot of regaining of status for people that people need to do, a lot of education. It's just, I think it's going to happen slowly but surely. But when people understand that they were born as the sovereign and then they gave it away through processes like birth certificates, etc., they can regain their status and reclaim status as a living man on the land, a sovereign man or woman on the land, and then they actually become higher jurisdiction than the legal system.
That's fascinating. I mean, what you just said earlier as well, though, just about again, this kind of the idea of like a Maori coin or something. Like, I think that's what I see unfolding, though, is that there's this sort of these kind of working groups, and there's kind of, for me, it's got all of the trappings of a co-opted thing, because generally it's going to be on some sort of proof of stake cryptocurrency. It's not going to be actual sound money, and so it leads to a sort of a further form of capture. But because it's a technical thing, it's software, it's technology. There's kind of a people want to roll their own, they want to try it out, but it's sort of takes away from the answer, which is that it needs to be a Bitcoin standard, and you can look at things on top of that. Sort of, again, you talk about this hierarchy of law, but I mean, if we consider Bitcoin to be, the sound layer, you can then build upon that foundation. And I think that's, I guess, what I'm not seeing in New Zealand is that people coming back down to a foundational. And so there's a lot of these blockchains and kind of working groups, and a lot of them are convened by a lot of these international corporations and exchanges and stuff. And for me, I just think, man, we need to go back to the base layer and build upon that. And that's why I sent you that link for Fedi. I don't know if you had a chance to. Yeah, I mean, I've had a chat with Obi, who's one of the founders, and I had another guy on the call, on the show recently, who was one of the designers for that project, graphic visual designer. But that's really interesting because that's kind of built on Bitcoin, using Fedi mints, which is kind of a higher layer, but the basing of it, the kind of the pegging of it, is Bitcoin. And then it also has communication, decentralized apps, a lot of stuff which is kind of more community focused. And I think that's maybe a slight difference, which takes maybe people a little while to understand that it's different to rolling your own crypto, and it actually isn't secure. Or even decentralized. It's like you're building upon this foundation, and I think that's where the old and the new kind of can come together. And I mean, I would love to see what tribal Fedis look like in New Zealand, or local Fedis, local communities, integrating Nostr, Bitcoin, all of that stuff.
Same. I think it'd be fascinating, and it would be liberating, and it would give a lot of dignity back to that's been taken away by the state structures over almost 200 years. I think it would be amazing for our country, and I agree. It should be built on something as sound as the Bitcoin. Can you peg a stable coin to Bitcoin?
Yeah, stable coins can be done. I mean, it's a kind of a complex area about the technical mechanism for how you do it, but there are ways of doing it. There's also, you can do, I think the emerging conversation now is the idea of e-cash and sort of tokens on top of Bitcoin, I guess you could say. I mean, that's a crude way of putting it, but I think, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I mean, I do have an issue with crypto generally, besides Bitcoin. I think it leads people down the wrong path. But what the intention was behind that was kind of maybe coming from a good place, that we can have our own money. I think that idea is really valuable, but it's like when you try to do it with some random cryptocurrency, it never works and it will always fail. But if you can do that kind of on Bitcoin, it's similar to, say, a gold standard, where each country or company or jurisdiction can issue IOUs for, pegged to gold, and they can have different pictures on them, but they're all pegged back to gold. In the same sense with eCash or Fedimint, you can have, tokens that peg down into Bitcoin, but they just maybe enable you to do stuff that you couldn't do. Or you could do it on Bitcoin as well, but it just means you have a little bit more
like layer 2, application utility kind of layer. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the wisest thing to peg it to Bitcoin if you can, because it's the most sound layer. I mean, some of the other cryptos, they have their uses and they've got huge communities around them, and I do follow and work a little bit in those realms as well. But for different purposes, I think there's good things happening at impact space and stuff like that. But there's just so many non-utility based meme coins that are going to go to zero, and there's people are getting tricked a lot, and if it's just a cool picture, it's not going to last.
Yeah.
If it has no actual real world utility, then it's not going to last,
Yeah, and I think that, in a sense, Gareth, that is where the Bitcoin maximalism kind of thing came from, because there was a period in time where even Satoshi was kind of looking at this stuff and talking about it with some optimism, but clearly, the idea that anyone can run their own blockchain, for example, is clearly wrong. It will always be second to Bitcoin, and eventually it will, go to zero. And we're seeing that even Ethereum and these kind of other things, they as money, that they cannot compete. Money will always converge on a single currency, and that is Bitcoin. And other stuff, if you do require other functionality, that is best built upon the Bitcoin stack as a layer 2, as a layer 3. And I think that's such a conceptual conversation that it's like, man, we've got probably a couple of years, if not longer, of work to do to really get that out there, that, you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at before, that within the New Zealand context, I see these blockchain summits and stuff, and they treat everything as kind of equal, but it's like, no, it needs to be Bitcoin, and if you're not on Bitcoin, it's going to fail, unfortunately. And if you do adopt Bitcoin, though, man, what could that mean? And again, I would love to see, and I'm not really in a position to do this myself, but I would love to see, iwi having genuine conversations about this. Talk about mining, for example. What would it mean for iwi to get mining operations going? I mean, that would be phenomenal, man. You can then have your own money, self-sovereign money, and you can be producing and exporting Bitcoin from geothermal or whatever, So I mean, that's or
just
pretty awesome.
Even solar panels on the top of maraes. I know there's an organisation that's doing that. I mean, and I'm talking to them about how can we put that on Bitcoin standard on the blockchain and actually just start to generate income or use the excess power to mine. I mean, why not? It's there. But yeah, I mean, I think that. I mean, I wouldn't totally agree with you about Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is definitely the root cause, the sound money, the originator, and just the algorithm is just fascinating. It's just so brilliant, and it's just an incredible mystery who this guy Satoshi, they, or whatever it might be, is. I think some of the other leading ones, ETH, Cardano, maybe Solana, have interesting things, and internet computers interesting as well. The data availability layer stuff's that interesting for data storage. They're not money solutions though, and ETH and those ones to me are not money solutions. They're value creation solutions, which for me is interesting because it unpicks and opens up further the idea of what is value compared to money and currency, and how are these older ideas coming in. That really Bitcoin started that conversation in the modern realm, but I think that there's there's legitimacy to those other chains. I don't know if they're going to go to zero or what's going to happen. I think there's too many people involved in them, but they do get overcomplicated and over intellectualized in a lot of ways as well, which I find kind of a bit boring.
I think my kind of holistic approach to it would be, we went through a period of a couple of years where there was really a lot of confusion and a lot of people got wrecked by getting sucked into these other things. In terms of the sort of latent utility, I think they serve as really good use cases of ways not to do things. If Ethereum never existed, would Bitcoin have not known just how bad proof of stake would be? Because it's easy to talk about how bad it is, but then to see, well, look, the people who have the Ethereum get more Ethereum, and the people who don't get. It's not an open system anymore like Bitcoin where anyone can mine, right? And so I think they do have some utility there as counterfactuals of what not to do. They also maybe have some ideas that can then be brought into Bitcoin, being sort of charitable. You've got smart contracts and things which maybe has informed some of the Bitcoin stuff that's coming out now, like a BitVM and some of these things. So, I mean, certainly I think we've won that piece. Maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was maybe a little bit more challenging. Anyone could spin up a coin, as you say, and kind of rug people. But as sort of latent test cases for how to do things, they can be interesting. And maybe look, what we might even see is some of that stuff actually starting to come over to Bitcoin as a layer. So if you want, if you want Ethereum type functionality, scripting languages on Bitcoin or powered by Bitcoin somehow, maybe you can build that out on a layer. And then it is actually some sort of sound foundation. And we've seen a little bit of this with some of the ordinals stuff. I don't know if you've come across that.
Yeah, I've come across it. Yeah.
And certainly it's kind of like, well, it's permissionless. You can, if you can do it, then you can do it. However people feel about that. But I think that again proves though that it's immutable, because with Ethereum they tried a few things and then they thought, oh, we've made a mistake, and they undid it with I don't know if you're familiar with the DAO hack So it's sort of,
and there's a huge amount of forks as well. I mean, I kind of joke that Ethereum reminds me of MySpace. Remember when you were on MySpace? Or it might be before your time. We were on MySpace.
I remember, man.
Yeah, then it just became so messy. It was like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's like that. I think that they serve their purpose, and that Bitcoin is, to coin a phrase, hip hop phrase, it's so fresh and so clean. I'm kind of would be adverse to putting too much on top of it, because I really love the fact that it does what it does, and it is the only thing that's ever existed to do it like that, and it's so unencumbered with extra utilities that may or may not work on top, and any sort of having to put a punt in here or a punt in there. I really love it actually clean.
Yeah, it's just easy, and it's unlike the existing financial system, it's so simple to understand once you really put you put in a little bit of time, a little bit of proof of work, but then it just clicks and you don't have to worry about it. It's such a fundamental thing.
It's genius. The halving to burn rate kind of thing, the difficulty adjustment, all that stuff is just genius. I mean, I just have no idea how it came up with it and how it actually worked. The level of algorithmic thinking is incredible.
But Gareth, we've talked about some good stuff. I'd love to do another episode with you sometime in the future, talking about some of this law stuff, the difference between a man and a person, these kinds of things, because that's interesting. I don't know if you're up for it. Maybe next time I'm back in New Zealand, we can do a sit down or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm going to do some work in that area. I'm working with a couple of people just to provide maybe an identity solution that is not like a wallet or anything, but it's just really more of a layer that actually establishes claims. And we get pretty deep with it. We're talking claims in this realm and non-physical realm, and countering claims all the way back to papal bulls from 1321. And these claims that have been put out in the universe about human beings and our water and our carbon and all these sorts of things that you actually, and it's like a spiritual thing really as well. You need to counter the claim, just put your own claim saying, this is who I am. I'm the soul that inhabits this body, and this is my body. I don't permit trespass against my property. This is my property. So these sorts of ideas, and actually making claims to that, because at the moment there is sort of loose claims out there, or not so loose claims out there in the material world, but also in the spiritual world that are counter to those ideas. So this is part of the whole awakening and standing in your power, I think, is actually to establish these claims.
Yeah, man, that is so interesting. I'm really looking forward to doing that, man. But Gareth, if people want to follow your work with Amnesty or your personal work, I mean, where can they find you, man?
I'm just garethfarry.com, or maybe I can send you my Nostr or whatever you can put in the show notes. Mainly just there, and Amnesty is Amnesty. Amnesty.org.nz. You can look at a lot of stuff we're doing there. But feel free to reach out to me on Nostr or something like that.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Hey, I really appreciate your time and sharing what you're working on. And I think there's a part 2 at some point around this the bigger picture of law and identity. But we'll do that when the time's right.
Awesome, bro. Cool. Thank you. Ka kite.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Codyellingham, and that was the transformation of value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.